The Food and Drug Administration is clearing the way for people to mix and match their COVID vaccine booster shots, which means they don't have to stick with the same vaccine brand that they initially received.
So, if you initially got a Johnson & Johnson shot, you can now get a Moderna booster shot, for example. And if it sounds confusing, it's because it is. Even the panel of health experts that advises the FDA agrees here.
I definitely echo the concerns of everybody that this is getting ultimately extremely confusing with respect to what patients are confronted with decision making. And there is a need to be clear with respect to full recommendations and options.
Here to clear up some of that confusion is Dr. Shereef Elnahal, President and CEO of University Hospital in Newark. So good to have you back here on the Big 7 Morning News, Dr. Elnahal.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's get into this because health officials, they've been pushing for the mix and match approach to booster shots for weeks now. Why is that?
Well, interestingly, the NIH released a study last week that showed that mixing and matching any type of vaccines with other vaccines is quite effective at boosting immunity. One interesting finding of that study was that the folks who got Johnson & Johnson originally had a much bigger immune system boost in the form of antibodies, especially when they took Moderna, but also when they took Pfizer when compared to another dose of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And so I think you're going to see a lot of folks demand, should the FDA authorize the ability to do this, who got Johnson & Johnson to get one of the other two vaccines based on that. But I think everybody should be following the guidance of their doctors. I agree that this is confusing. The doses are different depending on the type of vaccine, and the recommendation may be different for you. So this is important to follow the advice of your healthcare provider, should the FDA authorize boosters for these other vaccines.
So how soon could we see this happen, the mix and match of booster shots?
You can see it happen as soon as a matter of a week. So this week, the FDA is considering boosters for both Moderna and Johnson & Johnson, the CDC rather, to essentially fortify what the FDA decided last week. And then right after the CDC director weighs in on it, you should be able to do it. And so the FDA is independently considering the mixing and matching question as well in the coming days. And so at the very least, you should be able to get the same vaccine you got for Moderna and Johnson & Johnson. And should the FDA weigh in on mixing and matching, then it's really anything goes in terms of a booster, if you follow the timeline and if you get the right dose. So that's why it's important to follow the guidance of your provider.
Yeah, timeline, dosing, it's all important. But, everybody's immune system, reacts differently to the vaccines, right? So is there a chance, doctor, that mixing and matching could lead to complications in one person and maybe not somebody else?
What's interesting on that is that that was not what the study found. The side effect profile was well tolerated for any of the combinations, and they looked at every single possible combinations. They had many arms in that study. And so safety is not as much of a concern as efficacy and the degree to which your immune system responds. And there were favorable responses for all combinations, but the Johnson & Johnson phenomenon is interesting because, again, that response was better for Moderna and Pfizer boosters.
What's also interesting about the Moderna booster is that they're now saying, or they're recommending that it's a half of a dose of Moderna. But for those that got it early, they got a full dose. So some think, am I not getting as much of an effective booster compared to the people that are getting it now?
So it's clear that Moderna was wise to the fact that the immunity conferred by their vaccine was quite good, and then it lasted quite long. And so they intentionally studied only half a dose for that booster, with the sense that they may not need a full dose for that second time around. And so that ended up being true. The booster was quite effective despite being half dose. For Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson, it is the same dose as the original shot.
Okay. Dr. Elnahal, I want to get to Colin Powell's death due to COVID complications because it's giving anti-vaxxers, those who are not yet vaccinated, another reason now to double down and not get the vaccine and avoid booster shots, saying, well, if you get the vaccine, you can still very well die. What is your response here to that?
First of all, my heart goes out to Secretary Powell's families and incredible legacy of service to this country. I think Mr. Powell's case is a clear indication that everybody needs to be vaccinated. And that may sound unusual to folks, but here's a man who was vulnerable to COVID-19. He had cancer and multiple myeloma. And on top of that, he was getting treatment for multiple myeloma, all of which reduced the responsiveness of his immune system. And so we should all get vaccinated precisely because We need to protect ourselves, but
Right.
also to protect vulnerable people who don't respond as well to vaccination and can't respond as well to vaccination because of their conditions. And so this is actually a rallying cry for us all to get vaccinated to protect the vulnerable among us.
Yeah, and from what I understand, he was scheduled to get his booster shot as well. Dr. Elnahal, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate all of your knowledge and clearing up all the confusion for us this morning.
Come back soon.
My pleasure.